scary. That was just the sound of neighboring Mesopotamian city-states quarreling over something, perhaps land. More on this later. Welcome! Thank you for joining us in this 12-minute fascinating world of Mesopotamia. Today, aka right now, we will discuss Mesopotamia in many ways. Geographically, politically, economically, religiously, socially, culturally, and technologically. But first, let's discuss geography.
The civilization of Mesopotamia lies mostly in modern Iraq, and there's a gross mountain separating the Mesopotamian plain from the Iranian plateau. Deserts lie to the west and southwest, and the Persian Gulf lies southeast. Mesopotamia developed in a plain alongside and between the rivers Euphrates and Tigris, which start in the mountains of eastern Anatolia and empty into the Persian Gulf. The Euphrates and Tigris rivers' locations and importance in Mesopotamia gave the river valley its name, meaning land between the rivers. This area is an alluvial plain, a flat, fertile expanse built up after years of silt deposited by the rivers. The region of Mesopotamia lacked substantial rainfall, which caused farming to be dependent on irrigation. The natural spring floods were not able to be used because they were violent and unpredictable, as well as could change the course of the rivers, cutting off the peoples and fields from water. As a result, the people had to construct canals to bring water to the crops. Now on to political significance.
In Mesopotamia, political structure was divided into three categories: kings, citizens, and officials. The king's duty was to keep everybody protected and fed, maintain irrigation networks, lead in wars, and make justice in the community. The citizens were to serve the king by paying taxes and being involved in agriculture and war. In Babylon, political organization was laid through the building of temples and palaces, which signified kingship. Sumerian cities formed city-states which included farmland and the city itself. They were independent, but conflicts rose. Holding the city-states together was difficult because of invasions from outside people entering the property or rebellions from within. Cities needed food, so a lot of people went out and labored in fields. Some specialized in crafts, pottery, artwork, clothing, and tools. Mesopotamian cities collected leftover crops from villages and gave military protection to rural areas. Near the end of the 3rd millennium, Sargon, the ruler of the city of Akkad, united many cities under one king and capital. He and his family members placed governors and gave land to soldiers. Warfare was a constant battle as cities argued over land and water rights. The strong soldiers of Sumerian cities had weapons such as bow and arrows and were armed with bronze armor. Mesopotamian armies adopted a new piece of military technology, the horse-drawn chariot. Iron was coming into common use in weaponry and armor, and Assyria was the first state to have an army. Later on, the empires of Babylon and Persia adopted Assyrian military practices. The first king of Babylon was King Hammurabi in 1792 BCE. He conquered Mesopotamia and established the first Babylonian empire. He created a set of laws known as Hammurabi's Code of Law, inscribed on a polished black stone pillar, illustrating the principles to use in deciding cases. It also contained important ideas of having people provide evidence of a crime innocent until proven guilty and the protection for the weak. In Hammurabi's code, it was said that if anyone is committing a robbery and is caught, then he shall be put to death. Many offenses were faced with severe physical punishments such as death penalty. Now on to economy.
The economy was largely sustained by its variety of livestock, such as cattle and sheep, and its crops, such as barley, apples, wheat, and onions. Since the river floodings of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers were unpredictable, dams and canals were built after 3000 BCE to control the floodings. Conquest of states was often motivated by the need of certain necessary resources that the civilization did not have. A substitute to conquering new states and taking the resources was to trade a long distance in order to obtain raw materials. As early as the 5th millennium BCE, there's evidence of boats on rivers and seas that suggest overseas trade. Mesopotamia exported vegetable oil, wood, and barley in exchange for resources such as wood from Lebanon and Syria, gold from Egypt, tin from Afghanistan, silver from Anatolia, and copper from the Arabian Peninsula. Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan exported precious jewels and stones that were used for big figurines and jewelry. Some items were not traded for another item, but for measures of grain or precious metals. In the 3rd millennium BCE, commerce was chiefly controlled by the palace and the temple, given that they controlled the protection and transport of goods. So, the merchants were mostly employed by either the temple or palace. Merchants of the king or temple often traded the palace's surplus food in exchange for luxury goods and raw imports. But by the second millennium BCE, guilds, merchant associations, and independent merchants took trade into their own hands and traded freely. Now on to religion.
The religion of Mesopotamia was an infusion of two beliefs. When Semitic people began to dominate the areas of the Sumerians, the myth of Sumerian gods transferred to the Semitics, and most of the same rituals were practiced. They imagined their gods as anthropomorphic, meaning they are like humans in form and behavior. The Mesopotamians feared their gods and believed them to be responsible for natural disasters that occurred, so they tried to appease them through sacrifice and worship. Cities built temples to the gods, which included a shrine. The most visible part of the temple building was the ziggurat, a massive pyramid-shaped tower approached by ramps and stairs. The function of the ziggurat is unknown. To Mesopotamians, a temple was the god's residence, and the statue located at the shrine was believed to embody its life force. Priests in the temple met every need of the deity, and their hereditary position was passed down to their sons. Priests' families lived off rations of food from the deity's estates, and the amount they received depended on their rank of status. Scholars do not know if the public had access to these temples, but the people did place miniature replicas of themselves in the sanctuary, hoping to seek a deity's favor. The finding of amulets, which are charms meant to protect the wearer from evil, and representations of a host of demons, suggest that the general public of Mesopotamia shared a belief in magic. Though these beliefs were hard to determine by scholars, they show the complexity of religious customs in Mesopotamia. Now on to society.
Due to the new urbanized civilizations being developed during this time period, many social divisions generated. In Mesopotamia, the law code of Hammurabi was created and made three social classes. The highest status was free landowning class, which included royalty, high-ranking officials, warriors, priests, merchants, and some artisan and shopkeepers. The middle class was made up of dependent farmers and also artisans, which were the primary working force within Mesopotamian society. The lowest class was made up of slaves, chiefly employed in domestic service. This law code also altered the form of punishment given to those who committed a crime. If you were of high class, your punishment would be less harsh than that of a lower class. Slaves were very prevalent within society. Slaves mainly came from mountain tribes, either through trade or captured through war. Slaves were not chained, but they were marked through a certain haircut. To mark their freedom, their owners would shave their hair to free them from their duties as slaves. Men in Mesopotamian society were highly superior to women. The men would produce scribes, which are now used by researchers in order to depict what society was like within Mesopotamia. This position of creating scribes reflects how elite males were. Women, however, existed in an almost non-existent social role within society. Normally, women in these types of societies would act as hunter-gatherers, but in Mesopotamia, food production was dependent on physical labor, which was a man's job. Therefore, women's jobs were to produce a family. Women could own property, maintain control of family and finances, which were called dowry, and engage in trade. Some elite women worked in textiles, whereas non-elite women stayed at home with duties regarding farming, cooking, cleaning, fetching water, and weaving baskets. Some men could have two wives if their first wife was not able to give them children. Arranged marriage within this society also showed how women were only used for men's benefits, such as increased family wealth. Mesopotamian society at the start of the historical period was dominated by the Sumerians, and then near 2000 BCE, another group of people, Semites, ruled Mesopotamia.
Now on to culture.
Art was one of the main cultural aspects of Mesopotamia. Their art included sculptures made from stone and clay and some paintings. These art forms reflected their society, which was very agriculturally based. The sculptures depicted many farm animals such as goats and rams, as well as mythical creatures and religious gods. The sculptures also reflected how men were very prominent in society due to the many sculptures of men and gods rather than goddesses. Mesopotamia's civilization had a diversity of ceremonies and festivals, whether it was to celebrate marriage or the birth of a child, which were occupied with music, dancing, and food. The type of food served at these gatherings depended on the social standings of the family. The literature that has been recovered have been from royal libraries from Assyrian and late Babylonian times.
The literature is written in cuneiform and script that create hymns, myths, poetry, philosophy, politics, historical records, and even books full of spells and witchcraft. For leisurely activities, Mesopotamians would dance, play sports, or go hunting. Their form of dance was to honor their gods and goddesses during festivals. Researchers have found that a form of polo was played as depicted in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Assyrian kings were known for hunting big game such as lions, elephants, etc., and the Assyrian people would create a type of competition for who could catch the biggest game in order to please their king.
Now on to technology. The economy was largely sustained by its variety of livestock, such as cattle and sheep, and its crops, such as barley, apples, wheat, and onions. Since the river floodings of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers were unpredictable, dams and canals were built after 3000 BCE to control the floodings. Conquest of states was often motivated by the need of certain necessary resources that the civilization did not have. A substitute to conquering new states and taking the resources was to trade a long distance in order to obtain raw materials. As early as the 5th millennium BCE, there's evidence of boats on rivers and seas that suggest overseas trade. Mesopotamia exported vegetable oil, wood, and barley in exchange for resources such as wood from Lebanon and Syria, gold from Egypt, tin from Afghanistan, silver from Anatolia, and copper from the Arabian Peninsula. Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan exported precious jewels and stones that were used for figurines and jewelry. Some items were not traded for another item, but for measures of grain or precious metals. In the 3rd millennium BCE, commerce was chiefly controlled by the palace and the temple, given that they controlled the protection and transport of goods. So, the merchants were mostly employed by either the temple or palace. Merchants of the king or temple often traded the palace's surplus food in exchange for luxury goods and raw imports, but by the 2nd millennium BCE, guilds, merchant associations, and independent merchants took trade into their own hands and traded freely.
Looks like our time is coming to an end. Hope you learned all there is to know about Mesopotamia's thriving economic and political system, the very interesting societal and cultural aspects in everyday Mesopotamian life, and the fascinating religious beliefs along with their technological accomplishments. Bye!
Bye!